The scent of rain on dry earth always brought me back to that summer. It was the summer the truth, sharp and unforgiving, shattered our carefully constructed world. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman built of quiet strength and unspoken dreams. She moved through our small farmhouse like a gentle ghost. Her hands, always busy, could coax life from the most stubborn soil or mend a torn shirt with invisible stitches. My father, Thomas, was a man of few words but deep affections. His laughter was a rare, rumbling sound that filled the kitchen on special occasions. Our life was simple, predictable, and for a long time, it felt like enough. We had a dog named Buster, a scruffy terrier with ears that never quite matched. He was a constant shadow, his tail a blur of happy anticipation. He slept at the foot of my bed, a warm weight against my feet. The days unfolded with the rhythm of the seasons. Mornings were for chores, afternoons for school and exploring the woods behind our house. Evenings were for supper, whispered stories, and the comforting glow of the kerosene lamp. My younger sister, Clara, was a whirlwind of bright color and boundless energy. She trailed me everywhere, her questions a constant stream. She loved to draw, her crayon creations adorning every available surface. Her laughter was like tiny bells, a sound that could chase away any shadow. We were a unit, a tight-knit circle against the vastness of the world. That year, the drought had been particularly harsh. The corn stalks drooped, their leaves brittle and brown. The well was running low, its bucket scraping against dry stone. Eleanor worried openly, her brow furrowed as she scanned the cloudless sky. Thomas would place a comforting hand on her shoulder, his silence a language of reassurance. But even his reassurances felt thin against the relentless sun. The air grew heavy with unspoken tension. The usual easy camaraderie between my parents began to fray. Arguments, hushed at first, crept into the evenings. They were brief but sharp, like shards of glass. Clara would retreat to her room, her drawings forgotten. I would pretend to read, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. One stifling afternoon, I was helping my father mend a fence. The sun beat down relentlessly. Sweat trickled into my eyes. He was unusually quiet, his hammer blows deliberate and heavy. He paused, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "Sometimes," he said, his voice rough, "things aren't always what they seem, son." I looked at him, confused. His eyes, usually so clear, held a troubled depth. He didn't elaborate. He just picked up his hammer and resumed his work. The words, though, stayed with me, a seed of unease planted in my young mind. I didn't understand their weight then. I didn't know they were a preface to the storm. Later that week, a letter arrived. It was a thick envelope, the paper fine and expensive. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it. Her face, usually so serene, drained of color. She reread the words, her lips moving silently. Then, she let out a choked sob. Thomas rushed to her side, his concern etched on his face. "Eleanor? What is it?" he asked, his voice urgent. She couldn't speak. She just handed him the letter. He read it, his eyes widening with each line. His jaw tightened. He looked at Eleanor, a strange mixture of shock and something akin to pain in his gaze. Clara, sensing the shift, clung to my leg, her eyes wide with fear. Buster whined softly, sensing the distress. The quiet of the farmhouse was broken by a storm of emotions. Eleanor finally found her voice, a ragged whisper. He's coming back." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Thomas's face was a mask of stone. He didn't ask who he was. He knew. I didn't. My father left the next morning. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked out the back door, his worn suitcase in hand. He didn't look back. Eleanor watched him go, her face pale and drawn. Clara cried, burying her face in Eleanor's skirt. Buster stood by the door, his tail tucked low. The silence he left behind was deafening. It was a silence that screamed of endings. Days turned into weeks. The drought persisted. The letter's contents remained a dark secret, a shadow that clung to Eleanor. She moved through her days with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her eyes, once so full of life, seemed to hold a permanent sadness. She started spending more time in the garden, tending to the wilting plants as if they held the secrets of her own fading spirit. Clara, usually so vibrant, became withdrawn. She stopped drawing. She spoke in hushed tones, her bright laughter extinguished. She would often sit by the window, watching the empty road, her small face etched with a worry far beyond her years. I tried to comfort her, but I felt as lost as she did. My father's sudden departure had left a gaping hole in our lives. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a car pulled up our long, dusty driveway. It was a sleek, dark vehicle, out of place against the backdrop of our humble farm. My heart leaped into my throat. Eleanor, who had been sitting on the porch swing, stood up slowly. Her hands were clasped tightly. A man stepped out of the car. He was tall, with sharp features and a confident stride. He wore a suit that looked far too expensive for our dusty lane. He approached the house, his eyes scanning the small farmhouse. There was an air of authority about him, a presence that commanded attention. He looked nothing like my father. He looked nothing like anyone I had ever seen. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Eleanor remained frozen, her gaze fixed on him. He offered a polite, almost practiced smile. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "It's been a long time." The way he spoke her name sent a shiver down my spine. It was a name that held a history I didn't understand. He looked around, his eyes taking in the parched fields and the weathered house. A slight frown touched his lips. "You've done well to keep things going," he commented, his tone devoid of genuine warmth. He then turned his gaze towards the house, his eyes falling on Clara and me, who were peeking out from behind Eleanor's skirts. "And these must be the children," he said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Clara shrunk further into Eleanor's side. I stood my ground, my young mind struggling to process the scene unfolding before me. Who was this man? And why did his arrival fill the air with such a palpable tension? Eleanor finally moved. She took a small step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Arthur. These are my children." The name, Arthur, sounded alien on her tongue. It was clear this was not a stranger to their past. This was a ghost from a life I never knew existed. Arthur nodded, his gaze lingering on Clara. "She has your eyes, Eleanor." It was a strange observation, one that felt loaded with unspoken meaning. He then stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a small velvet box. "I've come to settle things," he announced, his voice firm. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on dark satin, was a ring. It was a large diamond, sparkling even in the fading light. It was a ring unlike any I had ever seen. Eleanor's breath hitched. Arthur held out the box towards her. "I believe this is rightfully yours, and I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." The air crackled with unspoken words. Clara whimpered. Buster began to bark, a low, anxious growl in his throat. The carefully constructed piece of our farm was about to be irrevocably broken. The scent of rain on dry earth suddenly felt like a harbinger of a different kind of storm. Arthur's gaze swept over us again, a subtle assessment that made me feel like a specimen under glass. He didn't seem to notice Buster's growing agitation, or perhaps he simply dismissed it. "This place," he began, gesturing vaguely with his free hand. "It's rustic. I'm surprised you've managed. But then again, you always were resourceful, Eleanor." The compliment, if it could be called that, felt laced with a condescension that prickled my skin. Eleanor finally found her voice, a little stronger this time, though still trembling. "Arthur, what exactly do you mean by settle things?" Her eyes flickered towards the ring, then back to his face. She didn't reach for the box. Her hands remained clasped, knuckles white. Arthur's smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes that I didn't like at all. "Precisely what I said. Settle things. You know, the inheritance, your father's estate. It's been handled quite efficiently, but there are some finalities to attend to. And of course," he paused, his gaze drifting towards the fields, "there are certain arrangements to be made regarding the farm itself." My mind, still too young to fully grasp the nuances of adult dealings, latched onto the word farm. This was our home. This was where my father worked, where my mother poured her heart into the soil. The idea that this stranger, this Arthur, could simply arrange things regarding it was deeply unsettling. Clara, sensing the shift in Eleanor's demeanor and the palpable tension radiating from Arthur, finally let out a small sob. "Mommy, I don't like him." Her voice was thin, reedy, a stark contrast to her usual vivacious tone. Arthur's eyes flickered down to her, and for a moment, the smooth facade wavered. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his features, quickly masked. "A sensitive child," he murmured, more to himself than to us. He then turned his attention back to Eleanor. "Now, Eleanor, about the ring, your grandmother's. It's a significant piece. It should be properly secured." Eleanor finally lowered her clasped hands, her fingers unfurling slowly. She looked at the ring, a breathtaking cascade of diamonds that seemed impossibly large, impossibly out of place in our simple world. I had seen pictures of jewelry in magazines, but nothing like this. It was a symbol of a wealth I couldn't comprehend, a world away from the worn linoleum of our kitchen. "My father would never have wanted it to be," Eleanor trailed off, her voice catching. She seemed to be searching for the right words, words that Arthur was clearly not interested in hearing. "Your father was a businessman, Eleanor," Arthur interrupted, his tone patient but firm. "He understood legacy, and this ring is a part of that legacy, a very valuable part." He tilted the box slightly, the diamonds catching the last rays of the sun, sending dazzling reflections dancing across the porch. I watched my mother's face. The worry lines deepened. Her lips pressed together in a thin, determined line. She was a woman of quiet strength, but this man, this Arthur, was a force I had never encountered. He exuded an aura of control, of entitlement. I don't want it, Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. "Not like this. Not from you." Arthur's smile tightened. Buster, sensing Eleanor's resolve, let out another low growl, his hackles rising. He was a small dog, but his protective instinct was fierce. "That's a shame, Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice losing some of its earlier smoothness. "Because it's not really a matter of wanting, it's a matter of rightful possession. And as your late father's executor, I am tasked with ensuring all assets are properly distributed." He closed the velvet box with a soft click.
Trembling.
The sound seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. He then reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim, leather-bound folder.
Percussion.
He flipped it open, revealing a series of documents.
A heartbeat.
"There are papers here.
Shadow.
Signatures required. regarding the transfer of certain properties and the liquidation of various holdings, including the farm. The word liquidation struck me like a physical blow. Liquidate meant to sell, to get rid of. My father's farm? Our home? I looked at Eleanor, my heart pounding. She looked as stunned as I felt. "You can't," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thomas, he worked so hard to keep this place." Arthur chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Thomas is no longer involved, Eleanor, and frankly, his efforts were admirable, but ultimately futile. The debts were mounting. Your father's estate, while substantial, was not without its liabilities. This farm, unfortunately, has become one of them." Debts? My father had debts? This was a narrative I had never been privy to. My father, the man of few words but deep affections, the man who laughed with a rumbling sound, had been struggling. It was another layer of the carefully constructed world that was starting to crumble. "You're lying," Eleanor stated, her voice a low, dangerous hum. Arthur raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Am I? I have the documentation right here, signed by your father himself. He was a man of foresight. He made provisions for all eventualities." He tapped the folder with a manicured finger. "And one of those eventualities, it seems, was the potential financial strain on this property. He foresaw that it might be more practical to consolidate assets elsewhere." Clara, who had been clinging to Eleanor, now tugged at her skirt. "Mommy, can we go inside? It's getting dark." Her innocent question cut through the charged atmosphere, a plea for normalcy. Eleanor looked down at Clara, then back at Arthur. Her eyes, once so full of warmth and life, now held a steely glint. She was a mother protecting her young. "I will not sign anything today, Arthur." Arthur sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "Eleanor, you're being unreasonable. This is a simple administrative matter. The longer you delay, the more costly it becomes, for everyone involved." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "Including yourself and the children." The implication hung heavy in the air. He was threatening us. He was threatening our home. Buster let out a sharp bark, pulling on his leash, his body rigid. "Get out of here, Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice now clear and strong. She stood straighter, her shoulders squared. She was no longer the gentle ghost. She was a force of nature. Arthur's expression hardened. The practiced politeness evaporated, revealing a cold, calculating man. "I'll be back, Eleanor, with lawyers if necessary. This is not a negotiation." He turned, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel of the driveway. He walked back to the sleek, dark car, its presence an unwelcome stain on our familiar landscape. He opened the driver's side door and paused, looking back at us. "Enjoy your evening," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Then he got into the car, and with a soft roar, it pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. The silence that descended was different from the silence before. It was a silence filled with dread, with the weight of Arthur's words. Eleanor stood on the porch, her face etched with a mixture of anger and fear. Clara, now trembling, buried her face in her mother's side. Buster, sensing the immediate threat had passed, whined and nudged Eleanor's hand. I looked at my mother, at the worry etched deep into her features. The scent of rain on dry earth still lingered, but now it felt less like a memory and more like a warning. The carefully constructed world had not just shattered, it was actively being dismantled, piece by piece, by a man who saw our lives as mere assets to be managed. The storm had arrived. Eleanor finally moved, her shoulders slumping slightly as the car disappeared down the winding lane. She knelt, pulling Clara into a tight hug. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Her voice, though attempting to soothe, was strained. Buster, sensing the shift, stopped whining and sat by Eleanor's knee, his tail giving a tentative thump against the wooden porch. "He was mean, Mommy," Clara whispered, her small voice muffled against Eleanor's shoulder. "I know, baby. He was. But we'll be okay." Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. There was a flicker of something there, a plea for reassurance that I, a child, couldn't truly provide. I could only offer a small, uncertain nod. "What did he mean about debts, Mom?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. The concept of my father owing people money felt alien. He was always so steady, so capable. Eleanor sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. She stood, taking Clara's hand. "It's complicated, honey. Sometimes grown-ups have difficult financial situations." She didn't meet my gaze directly. This was a conversation she was clearly unprepared for. One she was trying to navigate with a carefully constructed dam against the flood of reality. "But Dad wouldn't have debts," I insisted. "He always paid for everything." "Your father was a good man," Eleanor said, her voice firming. "He did his best, but sometimes life throws things at you." She gestured vaguely towards the fields, now bathed in the soft, fading light of dusk. "This farm, it's a lot to manage, especially on your own." The unspoken "after he was gone" hung between us. It was a constant ache, a shadow that Arthur's arrival had just ripped open. "He said he'll come back," Clara piped up, her voice laced with fear. "With lawyers." "We'll deal with it when he does," Eleanor said, but her words lacked conviction. She walked towards the edge of the porch, her gaze fixed on the distant tree line. The air had grown cooler, the promise of rain now a tangible chill. Buster trotted over to her, nudging her hand with his wet nose. "He can't take the farm," I said, my voice rising with a desperate certainty. "It's ours. Dad loved it." Eleanor finally turned, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "Your father did love it, and we will fight for it. I promise you that." The promise felt heavy, fragile, like a spiderweb in a gale. "But what if he's right?" I pressed. "About the debts? About liquidating?" The words still sounded harsh, foreign. "Arthur is a manipulative man, honey," Eleanor said, her voice regaining a measure of its usual strength. "He twists things to his advantage. Your father wouldn't have wanted us to lose this place. He built it up for us." She squeezed Clara's hand. "We'll look at those papers. We'll understand them, and then we'll figure out what to do." This was not the comforting reassurance I craved. This was a battle cry, albeit a weary one. It meant facing Arthur, facing his lawyers, facing whatever truths lay hidden in those documents. "Can I see the ring?" I asked, a sudden impulse. If this was so valuable, if it was part of the problem, I wanted to understand it. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then reached for her pocket. She pulled out the small, velvet box. The diamonds seemed to glow in the dim light, far too bright for the somber mood. She opened it, and the same dazzling cascade greeted us. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, her fear momentarily forgotten. "It is," Eleanor agreed softly. "And it's part of your father's legacy, not Arthur's." She closed the box with a decisive snap. "We'll keep it safe, and we'll keep this farm safe." But as she spoke, I saw the doubt in her eyes. I saw the immense burden she was carrying. Arthur hadn't just brought legal documents. He had brought a storm of uncertainty and fear that threatened to drown us all. The scent of rain was stronger now, a damp, earthy smell that promised not a cleansing shower, but a deluge. We went inside then, the porch light casting long shadows that danced with our unease. Eleanor locked the door, a gesture that felt both futile and necessary. Buster followed us in, his tail now tucked low, a silent testament to the lingering threat. Clara, exhausted by the day's events, was soon asleep in her bed, her breathing soft and even. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, the velvet ring box beside her, staring into the middle distance. I watched her, the weight of Arthur's words pressing down on me, on all of us. The night was long, and the storm was just beginning. The silence in the kitchen was thick with unspoken anxieties. Eleanor traced the rim of her empty teacup, her gaze distant. The faint hum of the refrigerator seemed amplified in the quiet, a mundane sound against the backdrop of impending upheaval. I sat across from her, my own mind replaying Arthur's smug pronouncements, his casual dismissal of my father's life's work. The farm, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell. "Mom," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "What if he's right about the debts?" The question felt heavy, loaded with the fear of confirming my worst suspicions. Eleanor finally looked at me, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "We don't know that yet, honey. Arthur is trying to scare us. He wants to make us feel helpless." Her words were a practiced reassurance, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She was fighting her own fear as much as she was fighting Arthur. "But he had papers," I persisted, the image of the folder Arthur had held so casually vivid in my mind. "Dad signed them." "Your father signed many things, all of them meant to protect us," Eleanor said, her tone softening. "He was a careful man. He wouldn't have put us in a position to lose this." She reached for the ring box, her fingers brushing against the velvet. "This ring, for example, it's worth a considerable amount. He always said it was our emergency fund, should we ever truly need it." "So he did have debts," I stated, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening lurch. My father, the man who always seemed to have every contingency covered, had been carrying a secret burden. Eleanor's shoulders slumped. "Yes, he had debts, more than I realized. He never wanted to worry me. He tried to manage it all himself." A tear traced a path down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "He was so proud of this place. He poured everything into it, not just his money, but his heart. He wanted it to be our future." The rain began to fall then, a gentle patter at first, then a steady drumming against the windows. It was a soft, melancholic sound, a soundtrack to our quiet despair. Buster, curled up on the rug, twitched his ears but didn't stir. Clara, asleep upstairs, remained oblivious to the storm brewing both outside and within our home. "What are we going to do?" I asked, the question echoing the fear that had settled deep in my gut. The farm, with its rolling fields and ancient oak trees, had always been the anchor of my world. The thought of losing it was unbearable. Eleanor picked up the ring box, her gaze fixed on the intricate diamonds. "We'll look at the papers tomorrow, together. We'll understand what we're up against, and then we'll make a plan." She looked at me, her expression resolute, though tinged with a deep sadness. "Your father wouldn't want us to give up, and I won't." The promise, though spoken with conviction, hung in the air like a fragile thread. I knew Arthur wouldn't be deterred by promises. He was a man of contracts and leverage. "He said he'd be back," I reminded her, the memory of his parting words chilling me. "And we'll be ready," Eleanor replied, her voice gaining strength. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked fields. The moonlight, now diffused by the clouds, cast a ghostly glow on the landscape. "This farm is more than just land and buildings, honey. It's memories. It's our history. It's your father's legacy. We can't let Arthur take that away." Her words were a balm, but the fear remained. I understood now that Arthur wasn't just interested in the property. He was interested in dismantling my father's life, in erasing his hard work and his love for this place. The fact that my father had kept these financial struggles from Eleanor, from us, spoke volumes about his desire to protect us. But it also meant we were walking into this battle blind. "He seemed so sure," I said, the image of Arthur's confident smile returning. "Like he already won." "He thinks he has," Eleanor agreed, turning back from the window. "But he doesn't know us. He doesn't know how much this place means to us. He doesn't know the strength your father had and the strength we have inherited." She walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this. We have to." The weight of her words settled on me, a mixture of hope and apprehension. The rain continued to fall, a relentless, steady rhythm that seemed to mirror the turmoil within our family. The night was far from over, and the true battle for our home had only just begun. The morning would bring a reckoning, a confrontation with the hidden truths of my father's life and the formidable power of the man who sought to claim it all. The scent of damp earth, once a comfort, now carried the weight of an impending storm, a storm that threatened to wash away everything we held dear. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, mirroring the mood inside the farmhouse. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean but shrouded in a damp chill. Eleanor, her eyes red-rimmed but her resolve firm, had already brewed a pot of strong coffee. She slid a mug towards me, the steam curling upwards like a silent question. "Ready to face the music?" she asked, her voice raspy. I nodded, my stomach twisting. The thought of those papers, of the potential disaster they represented, was a cold knot of dread. Arthur's smug confidence from the day before lingered, a phantom predator circling our weakened defenses. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness doing little to cut through the anxiety. "Did Dad ever mention anything about financial trouble?" I asked, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to sound accusatory, just seeking clarity. Eleanor sighed, stirring her coffee. "He was always a tight-lipped man when it came to money. He believed in providing, not burdening us with worries. He'd talk about investments, about the farm's potential, but never about the struggles." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the window. "He was so proud of what he built. He wanted this to be a legacy, not a liability." The word liability struck a raw nerve. Arthur's accusation, Arthur's intention, hung heavy in the air. He saw this farm as a problem to be solved, a financial drain to be eliminated. He didn't see the years of sweat and love poured into its soil. He didn't see my father's dreams etched into every fence post and barn beam. "He must have trusted Arthur," I mused aloud, trying to reconcile the man who had just threatened our home with the brother-in-law my father had supposedly confided in. For him to be involved with these papers. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Arthur was always good at presenting himself, charming, persuasive. Your father was a trusting soul, perhaps too trusting in the end. Her voice held a hint of regret, a lament for a trust misplaced. He believed family would always look out for family, a naive belief, perhaps, given Arthur's nature. The implications of her words were stark. My father, in his desire to protect us, might have inadvertently handed Arthur the keys to our ruin. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. My father, the man I idolized, had made a mistake, a monumental mistake. "Where are they?" I asked, gesturing towards the kitchen table. Eleanor reached for a worn leather briefcase tucked beneath the table. She opened it with a soft click, revealing a stack of documents tied with a faded ribbon. They looked official, imposing, a stark contrast to the cozy familiarity of our kitchen. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with the weight of their contents. "He gave these to me yesterday," she said, her voice low. "Said they were for my review. A courtesy, he called it." She pulled out the top document. I glanced at them. "It's complicated." I sat beside her, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We unfolded the first page. It was a thick, legal-sized document, dense with jargon and fine print. My father's signature, bold and unmistakable, was at the bottom of several pages. Each stroke of his pen felt like a blow. "What is this?" I whispered, my eyes scanning the unfamiliar terms. Mortgages, liens, collateral. The words swam before me, meaningless and terrifying. "It appears to be a series of loans," Eleanor explained, her finger tracing a particular clause. "Taken out over the last few years, against the farm, against everything." Her voice cracked on the last word. The rain had begun again, a soft drumming that seemed to echo the frantic beat of my own pulse. It was a steady, insistent sound, a reminder of the world outside this bubble of dread. Buster, who had been dozing by the door, stirred and padded over to Eleanor, resting his head on her lap. She absently stroked his fur, her gaze fixed on the papers. "He was trying to save us," I said, the realization dawning with a painful clarity. "He was trying to keep the farm afloat on his own. He didn't want us to know how bad things were." "He was a proud man," Eleanor agreed, her voice laced with a profound sadness. "He didn't want to admit defeat. He thought he could handle it. He always believed he could handle anything." She picked up another document, her hand trembling slightly. "But Arthur is not just a brother-in-law. He's a predator." The word hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. It was a harsh truth, but one that felt undeniably right. Arthur saw weakness, and he pounced. My father's quiet struggle, his attempt to shield us from hardship, had become his undoing. "So, these loans are tied to the farm?" I clarified, needing to understand the full scope of the threat. "If they aren't paid, Arthur can take it?" Eleanor's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a reflection of my own fear. "That's what it looks like, honey. These documents grant him considerable power. Power to foreclose, to liquidate." She turned the page, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There are clauses here about default, about seizing assets." My mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of it all. The farm, our home, our history, was teetering on the brink. Arthur, with his calculated smile and his legal jargon, was poised to snatch it all away. He wasn't just taking land. He was taking our past, our present, and our future. "He said he'd be back," I repeated, the chilling echo of his words resurfacing. "With his lawyers." "And he will be," Eleanor confirmed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But we won't be caught unprepared. We'll read every word. We'll understand every loophole." She looked at me, her gaze intense. "We'll fight this, honey. For your father, for us." The promise felt different this time. It wasn't a fragile spiderweb. It was a shield forged in the heat of necessity. We had to fight. We had no other choice. The rain outside intensified, drumming harder against the roof, a relentless rhythm that seemed to urge us towards action. The storm outside was a reflection of the tempest brewing within our family, and we were standing in its eye. The legal documents lay open between us, a battlefield map, and the fight for our home had truly begun. The hours that followed were a blur of intense scrutiny. We pored over the documents, each page a new wave of dread crashing over us. The legalese was a labyrinth designed to obscure rather than enlighten. Eleanor, with her sharp mind and unwavering determination, became our anchor. She cross-referenced clauses, her brow furrowed in concentration, her voice a low murmur as she deciphered the intricate language. I, armed with a legal dictionary and a growing sense of urgency, tried to keep pace, my mind a frantic engine trying to outrun the impending doom. Buster, sensing the tension, stayed close, occasionally nudging Eleanor's hand with his wet nose, a silent plea for calm. The rhythmic drumming of the rain had become a soundtrack to our desperation, each drop a ticking clock counting down our remaining time. As dawn approached, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, Eleanor let out a sharp gasp. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, were fixed on a particular section of one of the older loan agreements. "I don't believe it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned in, my own heart leaping into my throat. "What is it? What did you find?" "Look," she said, her fingers shaking as she pointed. "This loan, the largest one, taken out 5 years ago. It was co-signed." My brow furrowed. Co-signed? By whom? Eleanor's gaze flickered up to meet mine, and in her eyes, I saw a dawning horror, a profound shock that mirrored my own burgeoning understanding. "By Arthur," she breathed, the name a death knell. "And by your father." The rain seemed to falter, a brief, almost imperceptible pause in its relentless descent. The world outside held its breath. Arthur. Co-signed. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. My father hadn't just been borrowing money, he had been borrowing it with Arthur, in a partnership I hadn't even conceived of. "But why?" I stammered, the question a desperate plea for logic in a situation that was rapidly becoming illogical. Why would Dad co-sign a loan with Arthur if Arthur was going to use it against us? Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for another document, a different type of paper, thinner, almost like a personal letter. Her fingers fumbled with the seal. It was an addendum, a separate agreement, dated just weeks after the primary loan. "I think," she began, her voice strained. "I think your father trusted Arthur implicitly. He believed Arthur was helping him. Perhaps Arthur presented it as a business venture, a way to secure the farm's future, a joint investment." She unfolded the addendum. It was handwritten, the script familiar but shaky. My father's script. "This," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is a promissory note, a personal guarantee. Your father was guaranteeing the loan, not just for the farm, but with other assets." My mind reeled. Other assets? What other assets? The farm was everything. Then, as I looked closer at the addendum, at the hurried, almost desperate scrawl, a detail I'd overlooked earlier snagged my attention. A signature at the bottom, alongside my father's. It was Arthur's. But beneath Arthur's signature, almost an afterthought, was another name. A name I recognized with a jolt that sent shivers down my spine. "Wait," I said, my voice rising. "Who is this?" I pointed to the third signature. Eleanor followed my gaze, her eyes widened. She snatched the document, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It can't be." The name was my mother's. My mother, who had passed away years ago, long before these loans were even conceived. It was her signature, unmistakably hers. But how? It was impossible. A cold dread, far deeper than anything I had felt before, seeped into my bones. I looked at Eleanor, her face pale and etched with confusion. "This is impossible," she repeated, her voice trembling. She died years before this was signed. My gaze fell back to the addendum, to the date, 5 years ago. My mother had been gone for 7. Then a memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the fog of my anxiety. My father, in the months after my mother's death, had been a shadow of himself. He'd been lost, adrift in grief. He'd spoken of wanting to preserve her memory, of wanting to honor her legacy. He'd mentioned things he wanted to do, investments he'd considered, all related to her passion for art. Arthur had been there. Arthur, always the supportive brother-in-law, the one who offered condolences and then, no doubt, opportunities. I looked at the addendum again, at my father's signature, at Arthur's, and then at my mother's. A chilling realization began to form, a terrifying hypothesis. "He forged it," I said, the words a venomous hiss. "Arthur forged Mom's signature." Eleanor stared at me, her eyes wide with horror. "But why? Why would he need to forge her signature?" The answer, when it came, was brutal. It wasn't about securing the loan. It was about something far more insidious. I remembered Arthur's words yesterday. "Your father, he was a man of great sentiment, cherished certain heirlooms." Heirlooms. My mother's art, her entire collection. It was stored in the back room of the old barn, carefully preserved, a testament to her talent and my father's love. "The collateral," I whispered, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. "He used Mom's art as collateral. He convinced Dad to pledge it, and when Dad hesitated, or maybe didn't realize the full implications, Arthur forged Mom's signature on the personal guarantee addendum to make it seem like she, too, consented, to make it legally binding, to tie her legacy to this debt." Eleanor gasped, clutching the document as if it were a venomous snake. "He would do that? To her art?" "He would do anything," I said, the anger a hot, burning tide washing over me. "He sees it all as a commodity. He doesn't care about the memories, the love, the history. He only sees the value, the profit." I snatched the addendum, my hands shaking, but my resolve hardening. This changes everything. This isn't just about the farm anymore. This is about justice. This is about reclaiming Mom's legacy. The rain had stopped. The first rays of the sun, weak but persistent, began to break through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Arthur was due to arrive any moment. He expected us to be cowering, defeated. He expected to walk in and claim his prize. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The farmhouse door burst open, admitting Arthur, his usual smug smile plastered on his face. He was flanked by 2 men in dark suits, their faces impassive. "Well, well," Arthur said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Ready to sign the papers, are we? I've brought my legal team to ensure a smooth transaction." Eleanor stood, Buster growling softly at her side. I stepped forward, holding the addendum like a shield. "A smooth transaction, Arthur?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I don't think that's going to happen." Arthur's smile faltered. He glanced at the document in my hand. "What's that?" "This," I said, my voice ringing with newfound authority, "is proof. Proof that you are not just trying to take our home, but that you defiled my mother's memory by forging her signature to secure your predatory loan." The air crackled with tension. Arthur's face contorted, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. "That's a ridiculous accusation," Arthur stammered, his voice losing its smooth cadence. "My brother-in-law and I had a business arrangement. Your mother, she was always supportive. Supportive enough to consent to her life's work being used as collateral for a loan she never knew about? I challenged, stepping closer. Your signature is here, Dad's is here, and Mom's is here. And I know, with absolute certainty, that she was already gone when this was signed. This is fraud, Arthur, and it's coercion. I held up the addendum, my hand steady. Your lawyers can verify the handwriting. They can verify the dates. They can verify that Mom's signature is a forgery. Arthur's eyes darted between me, Eleanor, and his lawyers. Panic began to bloom in his gaze. This is a misunderstanding, he blustered, but the conviction was gone. There is no misunderstanding, Eleanor said, her voice now firm and clear. There is only your greed and your cruelty. You preyed on a grieving man, and you desecrated the memory of a woman who trusted you. One of Arthur's lawyers cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, if this document is indeed fraudulent, it could have significant legal ramifications for our client. Arthur visibly paled. He knew he was caught. He had overplayed his hand, blinded by his own avarice. You can't do this, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. We can, and we will, I said, my gaze unwavering. You have until the end of the day to withdraw all claims on this farm and on my mother's art. If you don't, these documents go to the authorities. And believe me, Arthur, the legal battles you'll face will make this little attempt at extortion look like a picnic. Arthur stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and fear. He knew he was defeated. He had underestimated us. He had underestimated the power of love, of memory, and of a family fighting for what was theirs. He turned abruptly, barking orders at his lawyers. They gathered their briefcases, their faces grim. Arthur, defeated and humiliated, stalked out of the farmhouse, Buster letting out a final, triumphant bark at his heels. The silence that descended was profound. Eleanor and I looked at each other, a wave of exhaustion washing over us, but also a deep, abiding sense of relief. The rain had stopped, and the sun, now fully risen, cast a warm glow through the windows, illuminating the farm, our home, in a new light. Later that day, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Eleanor and I sat on the porch swing, Buster curled at our feet. We had spent the afternoon carefully cataloging my mother's art, her paintings, her sculptures, each piece a testament to her spirit. Arthur's threat, for now, was gone. The loans would be dealt with, the legal ramifications of his fraud a problem for him to solve. He never understood, Eleanor said softly, her voice filled with a newfound peace. He never understood that this place, this art, it wasn't about money. It was about love, about legacy. I nodded, leaning my head on her shoulder. Dad tried to protect us, even in his grief. He made a mistake, trusting Arthur, but his heart was in the right place. And you, Eleanor said, her voice catching with emotion. You stepped up. You fought for us, for your father, for your mother. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. The weight had lifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. Arthur's betrayal had been a painful crucible, but it had forged us into something stronger. My father's legacy wasn't just the land. It was the resilience he had instilled in us, the love that bound us. And my mother's legacy, her art, was safe, its beauty preserved, its memory honored. The farm was ours, not just by legal right, but by the strength of our hearts. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky and a future, finally, our own. We had faced the darkness, and we had emerged into the light.